How do you spell coherent? Incoherent?
I
Is there two R's?
No, just one R.
Fuck. Dude, what the hell, man?
Okay. 3, 2, 1. 2 times now, Liz. 2 times we have gone into an episode, and on your topic, you have required some post-production wording to appear on the screen. Now, I want the audience to know that I do not edit this. I put the video together, and then you do the final editing for the upload. And 2 times you've done this, and 2 times you have made typos in the words that you've put on the screen.
I don't know what to tell you, man. They're like the most innocuous of typos. Like, it'll be like a double R. You know, like I swear it's not my fault. I don't have Office. Like, Google told me that was okay. You know,
Whose fault can it be? I have no idea.
Yeah, I have some type of spell checker out there. I don't know. Yeah. It's been unsuccessful so far. And like, honestly, with the last video, you've no idea how many times I checked it, but the third time's lucky anyway.
Well, it's just been one of those running jokes, I think, where we have like the stock image as the thumbnail, and we also have the typos in the words when we put them on the screen.
I find a typo this video, you know.
Yeah, so it's exactly on brand for this podcast. Which, if you didn't know, this is Guide to the 21st Century, a conversational podcast between two friends, Lewis and I, discussing topical issues and trying to navigate the minefield that is life in the 21st century.
Yep. Each week, Scott and I will be going away and thinking about something that's been playing in our mind, and then we'll bring that to the topic for the episode and just pretty much disseminate that information and try to come to conclusions that we wouldn't have been able to achieve on our own.
Yeah, so I'm first this week, and my topic is a bit of a continuation of a previous topic that I discussed. Yes. So a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about separating art from the artist. So if you haven't seen it, go check out that episode. But
6.
yeah, but so in that episode we kind of touched a little bit on cancel culture by accident. So we kind of like skimmed the surface of what cancel culture was, and we spoke about it in a little bit of detail, trying almost speaking about it in terms of like social media and how it becomes this strange like echo chamber. So something happened this week that has made me sort of think about cancel culture even more, and how about cancel culture is actually evolving. It's becoming something new. You know, a few years ago, cancel culture was quite clear. It was someone trying to get, or a group of people trying to get somebody cancelled off the internet or off a show or off something like that. But the issue that happened this week is something almost like different. It's not trying to get someone cancelled per se, but it is like a form of cancelling them in a way. So the incident I'm talking about this week is one of the streamers that I watch, one of the YouTube channels that I watch. So recently, you know, with lockdown, there's been a lot of people being stuck inside. I've decided to watch a lot of like YouTube content, and one of the groups that I've started to watch are a group called Offline TV. Now, long story short, I've been playing this game recently called Among Us, which is quite fun. It's quite interesting, and one of the streamers that I've watched is called DisguisedToast. Now, DisguisedToast is like this really smart dude. He's like he's quite well articulated. He kind of knows what he's talking about. He seems like he's quite aware, and he's quite funny as well. But I will say one thing about him is his jokes probably ride the line quite often. So he makes kind of like, he's got dark humour. It's quite edgy humour. And this week, a member of his audience put a Twitter thread at him, describing about how these edgy jokes and kind of dark humour are actually like offending a lot of people, and about how they are hurting a lot of people. So it became this, it was a huge thread filled with an incredible detail, and sadly I can't show it right now because the account that posted it has been protected since then. You know, I can't see the tweets anymore. But you know, the thread was basically saying that he made some sort of like, he made sexist jokes, he made like racist jokes, and it was like jokes that kind of were riding the line between sort of like funny / offensive, you know, those kind of jokes where it's kind of edgy a little bit.
Edgy is exactly the humour you're talking about here,
yeah. So basically, DisguisedToast has put out a response to this in the form of a twit longer, and it's basically just a sort of long form tweet that tries to like almost explain and like defend himself. So I'm just going to go through that a little bit just now, just to give you a little bit of context of what's happening. So he basically says that there are a bunch of sort of Twitter stans, and stans are this sort of like group of people that are like huge fans of someone or like huge fans of some sort of culture, but recently they've become like a sort of cancel culture machine, where they sort of did work for good for a little bit, but now they're becoming this sort of cancel culture engine.
Okay.
These sort of super fans that are trying to make these systemic issues personal. So these people have kind of came at him, and it sort of fronted by this one person who's put together this thread. And he basically says in the Twit Longer that he's always kind of towed the line between like edgy humour when it comes to being online. He's been online for quite a while. He talks about how he takes full responsibility for all the things that he says and all the things that he's done. And he's kind of proud of what he's done. He goes on to a little bit to say how normally he would just say something along the lines of, just don't watch my content if you're like offended by it, which I guess is a fairly reasonable response. But then he goes on to say that his attention has been brought to it because there are people that are like losing their minds over it, and there are people that are like seriously offended by the things that he's been saying. Right. So the thread kind of spoke about how he was like a little bit racist, and it spoke about how it was like a video in like 2 years ago they were doing like a don't laugh challenge, and in an attempt to get a laugh he read out a race joke off a website. He literally just had like a website on his phone and he read this joke out, and I think it ended up getting a laugh, but people seem to think that he supports like racism in this way,
because he read a racist joke.
Yeah. So
okay.
He basically goes on to say, and by the way, DisguisedToast is also Asian. He goes on to say that he's someone that's experienced sort of like racism in his life, you know, being Asian,
actual real racism,
racism in school and stuff like that. And the fact that he read out the joke doesn't make him racist. There's like accusations of him being like a racist, like off stream as well. But I think this one we can like disregard pretty quickly, because all of the streamers that he plays with like replied to the tweet that he put out addressing this, and they were like, he's not like this off stream, like you guys don't know him off stream. It's like his friend group is quite a diverse racial group, and there are also a lot of women in this group as well, which leads me to believe, you know, and these are like big streamers. We're talking about like Pokimane, we're talking about Valkyrie, we're talking about Fusely. Like these streamers, they're huge. They're massive content creators online. They don't need to be playing with DisguisedToast just because he's a big streamer, you know.
Okay.
So I find it quite hard to believe that he is racist or sexist or anything off stream, and these people are still sort of interacting with him because they don't need him. They're just friends with him, like in real life. Another one says here about how he promotes paedophilia, and it was like during a game of Pictionary they were playing, the prompt he was given was illegal, and he drew a stick figure of a young girl, obviously meaning that paedophilia is illegal, and people were saying that, you know, he promotes paedophilia, and that he's like a rape advocate and stuff like that, which quite frankly is crazy.
Stupidity, but
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. You know, it's just sort of like, and the joke about, you know, he drew like an underage girl for the word illegal, and obviously the thing is there that paedophilia equals bad.
Is illegal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's implicitly he's actually saying that this is a bad thing, guys.
Yeah, he goes on.
But it's like, you can't mention that, otherwise you support it.
Yeah,
I guess
exactly. He goes on a little bit to say about there was a video of him that said something along the lines of like, if a girl says no, just keep asking until she gives in. Now, and he specifically says in this one that he probably realised he went a bit too far in that one, and after he said it, like, there was like women in the call with him on the like in his game, and they were kind of he was like kind of using them as a foil for like reaction, you know, and they're not taking any offence to it. They know that he's not being
doing that. They know what's happening.
They know exactly what he's doing. But anyway, he goes back on this one. He's like, you know, maybe I wouldn't have said that one. That one was a little bit in poor taste. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. There are some other things about I think some of the people that were trying to get him cancelled said that he used like the R slur, which is basically the word, you know, retard. You know, calling someone a retard, you know, insinuating that they have like mental difficulties or something like that.
Right.
But he goes on to say that like he doesn't even use that word. There's like no clips or like VODs of him using that in recent memory. Maybe he used it like when he first started streaming, but he clearly like shows that he doesn't think it's a word that should be used anymore.
That sounds just like someone's just literally just found that one mention of a word somewhere and tied into it. You know.
Yeah,
I don't think that's that's probably lower down the list for a reason.
Mm-hmm. So he says like his humour is basically edgy, and he says that going forward he's going to try and be a bit more aware of that. He compares himself to like Michael Scott from The Office or like Joey from Friends, and these characters like say insensitive stuff, but they do it in like a way that's like either of ignorance or it's kind of like plays with the audience a little bit.
It's not to cause offence, and that's pretty obvious for most people that hear it or are involved with it.
Yeah. So that's basically the story anyway. And this person put a tweet thread that was talking about how these things that he's doing are actually hurting people, and how they are like offending people. So straight away, I just want to get your like initial thoughts on cancel culture in general. So, like I say, the person that put out this thread isn't even trying to cancel DisguisedToast. They're just trying to quote unquote educate him on the things that he's doing that are hurting people. So it's not even like they're trying to get him cancelled this time. They're just trying to cancel specific bits of his content. They're trying to get him to change his content, like in an online space. So cancel culture in general, can it be good? Can it be bad? What are we thinking about it?
Well, I guess I can't exactly remember how we talked about this in episode 6, so I might be rehashing certain ideas I have here. But we've probably developed our thoughts a little bit since then anyway. In terms of cancel culture, obviously it comes from a good place, right? Like these people, I think it comes from a good place, or at least the intentions when you look at it in the heart of it, they're pretty pure. These people are like you kept saying there that like people are really offended by this, and people are really getting upset about it and stuff like that. And like that, if people really were getting upset about it, then if people were really offended about it, then maybe actually we should have a conversation about this. That's not an unreasonable thing to do. Mm-hmm. The question really comes about though is that, are people actually upset about this, or is this people taking this as an opportunity to voice and get a bit of attention for themselves? It's because like I see what you said at the beginning there. Like this is no longer just about getting someone cancelled. I think you're right. I think this is like what you're describing is like we're talking about public shaming, like modern 21st century. The concept of people like publicly ridiculing, lambasting someone, and like because you're right. There's like these people that are doing this. They don't want DisguisedToast off Twitch. They just want people to know that he's a bad person and they're a good person for being aware of that. So that's kind of what I think about cancel culture. By the way, I just have to mention, I know it's kind of breaking the flow, but like I swear to you, man, up until you said DisguisedToast, I thought his name was DisgustedToast. I cannot fucking spell. Okay, this isn't my fault.
Listen, that's neither here nor there, Lewis. All right, we all know how bad you are at spelling.
Yeah, back on topic. Yeah, basically, cancel culture. I think it's an inherently good thing, but it just seems disingenuous, and I like this idea of it more being akin to public shaming.
So, I don't think that cancel culture is necessarily a bad thing either. But I don't think it's a good thing in the way that it's going about just now. So if you were to use cancel culture in terms of trying to educate people, especially audiences, if you were to show audiences why the content or why the show or why the YouTube streamer or whatever it is, if you were to show them why it's dangerous, then they would probably stop using that. If you managed to convince them, they would stop using it. And that would be a form of kind of cancelling it, I think that's the way that they should be going about it. I would agree that there are some people that, in this cancel culture engine that are doing it for good reasons. The reasons are pure. But there probably are a lot of like social justice warriors that are like doing it as well. Mm-hmm. Now, the first instance of cancel culture that I ever experienced was about 4 years ago now. I used to watch a group on YouTube called Kind of Funny. I don't know if you knew who they were, but they were a bunch of guys who did like PlayStation content on IGN, and I was a big gamer at the time, and they basically split off from IGN and they made their own company. So I followed them for a while, and I think it was either 1 or 2 years into their life cycle. One of the co-founders was quite a well-renowned Republican. So he was a follower of the Republican Party, and I think a lot of the games journalism and that kind of media, they're quite left leaning. Right. So I think a lot of people had like a bee in their bonnet about him already. But but he basically, on like International Women's Day, he chose this day to put out a tweet that said, peace and quiet, a day without a woman.
Okay. Just being an asshole.
Yeah, so he put out this tweet. Now, obviously, like, doesn't think this. Like,
that's humour, obviously. That's supposed to be a funny tweet, right?
It's very clearly a joke, but I think there was like that combined with the fact that a lot of people already didn't like him in the space. It kind of it was like the fuel to the fire that they were trying to burn, you know. So eventually, it was a huge backlash about it. Basically, the other co-founders kind of tweeted out like against it, and they were like, you know, we don't support this kind of joke. You know, there's no context for it, like sort of thing. They kind of threw him under the bus almost.
Yeah, it's something like that.
So, but eventually, anyway, so he left the company and he started his own. Like gaming Patreon and stuff like that. And he's actually, I think he now has the biggest gaming Patreon in the world. So he did like fine, but he got that was the first instance that I've seen of someone like being cancelled. And I think it's bizarre that you want to get someone thrown off the internet for something as like trivial as that, because I don't think if a woman like reads this, peace and quiet, a day without a woman, is anybody really offended by this? Because the tweet's obviously insinuating women are loud. But who reads this and like gets upset about it? You know, like who cares?
Who's reading this and taking it as fact, or like thinking that this guy genuinely thinks that, or who's even reading that and thinking that that's a thought that someone would share in real life? You know, like that's this is just a tweet. You know, and I it's basically it reinforces that point, which was that we're like so removed from the actual problem here, you know, like that's someone's tweet there. You could have tried to actually address that in a way that was what someone could perceive to be more beneficial, so like through education and starting a conversation, you know?
Exactly.
Sure, exactly. But instead it's just become like this phenomenon where the conversation is like the last thing that's going to happen. You know, it's like, see to give an example of like cancel culture that I think totally missed the point of the whole movement was in Bristol. Mind when a couple of months back now they threw the statue of the slaver into the harbour.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I you might not know the story, but it was quite big in Bristol, obviously. So yeah, during pretty shortly after BLM started really picking up, I think it was probably after George Floyd was murdered, relatively shortly after that. And this was like still during COVID lockdown. A lot of people got together in Bristol to protest. Well, not to protest, but to support BLM. But they were basically protesting. I don't know who they're protesting against. I think it was kind of like a general, the world isn't a state we want it to be in.
Maybe so like an awareness thing, yeah.
Yeah, sure, they're just making noise. But like during this process, they I don't know how it spreads. It's probably through social media in one way or another. But it was decided that they wanted to get rid of a statue it's like right on Bristol Harbour, and basically it was a guy that was a philanthropist that he made lots and lots of money. He was an industrialist, but he made more or less all of his money off slaving. And the idea was that this is really offensive and can cause people distress. So the crowd effectively turned into like a riot. Well, not quite a riot, you know, but it became very much disorganised and like ripped the thing off, and a bunch of people basically threw it in a harbour. And you know, afterwards, I remember seeing the video and everyone celebrating afterwards. It's like, yeah, we've done it. It's like, what have you done? Honestly, what do you think has actually been achieved by putting that statue? Because I get it. That could have been offensive. You know, see if your family came from slavery and like there's a statue on the harbour commemorating this guy that killed your ancestors. Like, fair enough. That could potentially be pretty offensive. But we're talking about Black Lives Matter here. What the fuck has that statue got to do with Black Lives Matter? And you know, and I do agree there are conversations to be had, but you're not having a conversation. You're throwing a statue in a fucking river.
Yeah, I mean, if the guy was to have been like made all of his money in like the slave trade, and that was like notoriously what he was for, I think there's probably a case to be made for that statue to probably be removed. You know, it seems like an offensive statue. It's like, yeah, you could do that. I think this is probably an example of people not being able to have a big impact on things, and this is just the small thing that they do that they think they're having an impact. You know, it's the way in which they kind of think there is systemic racism, and this is the step that they think they can take to try and sort of dismantle that.
Okay.
I think it's important to note here that the things that we're talking about in terms of like when I'm talking about cancel culture online, I'm not talking about like illegal stuff. I'm not talking about like abuse and like law breaking online. That's not necessarily the issue. I'm more sort of thinking about sort of grey area in between. So when we talk about the statue, there probably is a conversation to be had there, you know, and these people probably feel like they're making they're making their stand, you know, they're doing something.
They think they're making the world a better place.
Yeah, they're doing what they think is right, you know, and you know, it sounds like, if based on the information that you've told me, that might have been a good step. You know, there was definitely a conversation
Maybe.
to be had there.
But it wasn't had. You know, that is the problem in itself.
Yeah. So there are things that are clearly hate, though, when we talk about things that are online or statues. There are like racism, sexism. Do we think that these things should be cancelled? So that's obviously the worst of the spectrum, and the outside of things being illegal, I would say the worst of the spectrum of the content you can see online is like racist and sexist content. If anything that should be deplatformed, it's that. But should we be cancelling that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, in terms of things that aren't illegal, the worst thing you are likely to see online would be something that's grossly offensive.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anything else that... It's because there's a law for it, you know, for anything else, so you don't worry about it. Should things be deflatformed because they're offensive? It's a problem, isn't it? It's like very hard to draw the line, because like there is... I think it's most difficult to draw the line when it comes to comedy. It's because comedy is inherently, it's like shock factor, and it makes you think about these things. For instance, like when it comes to DisguisedToast's joke about, you know, paedophilia, bad, you know, it's like, this is a joke talking about paedophilia to effectively to try and educate you. It's just to show you like the hilarity and the bizarreness of this act in itself, and it's like to make an awareness of where it's bad. So that seems like a very obvious case where it seems to me like, sure, that's something that could be very grossly offensive, but it's quite adamantly as well making it's against the act of it in itself, you know. So that seems like a negative thing.
Yeah,
a positive thing.
I don't think that the jokes are the content online that is like clearly racist. Though I'm talking about like if
you're talking about like hate groups or something.
Yeah, if we had like a video on YouTube that literally went out and told people to be white supremacists, that told them that like black people were worse than white people and stuff like that, should we be deplatforming that? Because I think there's an element of, if I had a website, I wouldn't want my website to be a platform for that sort of thing. Yeah, but if another website said that you can post whatever you want on this website, does that mean that it shouldn't be there?
Well, I think that if you own a website, you should have complete and utter control over what is and isn't on it. And unfortunately, free speech on privately owned platforms doesn't exist. You know, free speech exists when you go into the town square and start telling people what you think. It doesn't exist in this type of environment. So, you know, I think that these companies are completely allowed to do that. But I was going to say that probably the one scenario in which I do warrant deplatforming or like cancelling or whatever would be when people, or when like the movements. I was going to try and describe how like when the movements kind of inherently promote violence, you know, but then as soon as I thought about it, I realized how like iffy is that, you know, because like for instance, like there are groups that are, you know, anti-trans or like anti-gay or like these anti sexualities and that type of thing, and it's like, should you be deplatformed for disagreeing with someone's sexuality? It's like, I don't think so. That's not people can think that. That's totally fine. The problem is though that in these groups, it effectively becomes a bunch of people that dislike another bunch of people, and that just leads to alienization, which leads to the potential of violence and violent thoughts and further stigmatization. So, you know, how like even my one simple answer of like, well, think about violence starts to break down. when
I would agree, though. I would agree with you in the sense that I think there are really only two things that should be deplatformed, and that is probably incitation of violence and the spreading of misinformation. Now, I think if your video or your content source comes to a conclusion or comes to something or is trying to convince you of something, but it does so in a way that is non-genuine, if it's proven lies, then that probably shouldn't exist either. I mean, something if you're spreading misinformation and you're changing people's opinions based on that, especially when it comes to race or sexual orientation or any of that kind of stuff. If you're changing people's opinions based on misinformation, then that's clearly racist or sexist content or homophobic content. It's not. I don't think there's any place for that. There's no place for lies, and there's no place for violence on the internet.
Yeah, I agree, but when it comes to discussions about for instance, we're talking about hate groups here. It's a lot of the things that they talk about, because they're social issues. There's not. I don't think it would be obvious what's misinformation and what's an opinion. And if that's the case, then even if we had this imaginary fact checker that was able to police the internet, what we're talking about here is, I don't think it's as simple as these people are spreading lies. I think that the reason that they propagate so well in the first place is because it's extremely. These things are grey areas, a lot of time, especially politics. Because politics, you could quite easily find proof to argue an opinion one way or the other, and you'll be able to find information that backs it up. So,
but that's not those aren't facts. Then if you find proof to do things one way or the other, it becomes a discussion. That's not the kind of stuff that I'm saying should be deplatformed. That there will be information one way and information another way to try and convince you either or. I'm talking about if they were spreading disingenuous statistics, or they were specifically saying facts that were factually untrue. That I think there are a lot of these areas where information can be interpreted one way or the other, but that's not what I think should be cancelled.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think I see what you're saying. But I guess what I'm almost arguing is that you could be using an opinion and then backing that up with scientific methods, and the facts themselves might be true, but the way you're construing it, that might be the false part. So I think it could be. I think what we're describing, I can only imagine how difficult it would be to impartially look at a community or a website and determine whether the content was misinformation or not.
I guess the way that you phrase the information that you present could be sort of disingenuous as well.
That would be the bit that sells it, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. So I guess there is that kind of grey area, and if that is misinformation, if it's presented in a certain way, it should be relatively easy to debunk that. No, if something is presented wrongly to you, if there's information out there, a way to cancel that would be to not remove the video, but to try and do a response video, or to educate people in the comments of that video, to try and respond to it in a way that gives people a better idea of the whole picture. So when we move into these grey areas like jokes and critical opinions, things that aren't specifically hate or incitation of violence, but are perceived as hate by some. In the instance of DisguisedToast, there are these jokes which are being sort of perceived as offensive jokes. Is there any space to deplatform those?
I just don't see how it would. I guess what we're talking about, the theoretical stuff here. I think you're probably right, and maybe it would be possible for one person to look at a bit of information they see and then to make an impartial view and respond to it, and that would be a super. I think that on a individual level, that has to be the best way of dealing with when you encounter misinformation like this. So I think I agree with what you're proposing in practice. I think it makes perfect sense. I just think that in reality, probably I would imagine the amount of sources that you're seeing that are potentially full of misinformation, the volume is so vast that people individually trying to speak out and fact check and debunk is almost like a failing battle to even begin with. It's because how do you yeah, the fact that like fake news is a thing makes me feel that the idea of like deplatforming someone for misinformation is what's it, a dry start, a hard starter. Like I think it's one of those things that would just be so difficult to even think about how we're going to approach this, and especially like whoever started dealing. If this was taken from from an individual level to like a governmental level or like an organizational level, like it would just the biases would start showing through, and I just don't see how. I don't think you should be deplatforming people for misinformation.
Okay, so you've now almost come to the side where you don't think anyone should be being deplatformed.
Apart from violence, I totally agree with the violence part. And I think there's probably, like, the thing about information is that my problem I have is that I think so much of the information you see is ambiguous. I think when it comes to like calls to violence, it's probably a lot less ambiguous, and I think it's hard, man. Because what we're talking about here is an issue that's like so it's subjective. What we're talking about, both of what we're talking about here, are subjective to a degree. So how do you deal with that? But I think you're right. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I actually think that misinformation doesn't warrant being cancelled, which is something that I hadn't thought before. But now that I'm thinking about it, I just don't see how it could possibly be done, and I think it would lead possibly to more damage than good.
Yeah, so we're already, after like a short conversation, we're realising how like complex an issue this might possibly be. There are so many avenues to explore for it. Mm-hmm. So in the case of DisguisedToast, we have this person who's in his audience, who, and in the tweet, it was sort of coming across in the sense that this person was trying to educate him in what he was doing. Now that implies that there is right and wrong here. There's like fact and non-fact, which isn't really the case. It's because he's riding the line between where things become offensive and where they're not offensive, and even at that, they're also jokes. They're not things that he actually thinks.
Yeah, it's further muddied by the fact that this is involving humour.
So we have these people that are claiming, that are sort of almost part of this cancel culture machine now, who aren't exactly trying to get him deplatformed, but they're trying to tell him to change his personality almost, changes like internet, changes internet, his internet persona, and they're doing so under the banner of education.
Yeah,
and
I'm right and you're wrong.
There's not really a right and wrong thing here, because the things that they're saying people are finding offensive. There are also so many people that are like enjoying this content. So what do we do there? Where's this line? How do we balance this?
Well, do you not think that just when we're talking about the people that we're talking about here that do like meticulously start going through someone's background and fact checking them and start basically telling them, you've done this wrong on these number of occasions and I'm here to correct you. It's like, well, one, it seems like so fucking self-aggrandizing,
self-righteous, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like these people that have such a high opinion of themselves, they genuinely believe that, almost is flabbergasting to me. But I guess that what a lot of the time on the podcast, I think we often come back to this concept of like, on like social media, just getting that like dopamine rush, getting that hit. And I think something that's so potent about cancel culture is that these people are able to have a message and directly see the consequences of what they've said in real life.
Have an instant impact.
I think people that are able to see what they've done in the real world, I think that's like a huge power kick, maybe. I don't know. I just think it's a massive dopamine rush, and it's like really unlike a lot of other interactions out there. So to me, it's like it's like the ultimate form of like getting your internet gratification. Thank you. That's the one.
It seems so strange to me though that there are people that are pushing this as like education when there are so many like conflicting opinions on it. Now, in the case of DisguisedToast, I think that the content that he's putting out that people are saying is offensive, The reason they don't want him deplatformed is because the content is so borderline that if they did try to get him deplatformed, it would probably fail miserably. Like, you know, the idea or the mission of getting him taken off the platforms he's on is like so unrealistic for them that it's never going to
sky.
It's never going to happen. So instead of doing that, what they've actually done is they've said, we don't want to deplatform you. We're just here to educate you on why the things you're doing are kind of wrong. And they're trying to make their change that way. And it's almost like pushing their boundaries onto like someone else, you know, when people's boundaries are just like totally different. Like, so they're talking about sexist jokes. And like I said earlier, there are so many female streamers that like play with him, that are bigger than him, and don't think this about him. They're like, yeah, he's not a sexist offline. Like, he's not even a sexist like online, you know?
Do you not think that this, like, painting it as education, that's almost like a defense mechanism for these people? Because from what my understanding of the definition is, it seems like we're talking about virtue signaling. Like, maybe not virtual signaling, but like making someone aware of the actions and basically educating them to make them aware of how less privileged people can be offended by what you're doing, what you're saying, and that type of thing, I suppose. Which, in my mind, I was seeing connections with virtue signaling, and if if that is the case, and people really are doing this, I think they're almost using this as like a defense technique. It's like, I'm not the mob. I'm not someone that's just trying to tear someone down. I'm trying to make them better. You know, not only am I educating them and making them a better person, I'm not going after them. You know, I'm not being evil here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help. That's the kind of how I feel about it.
It's almost like they're being self-righteous, but they're also being like, I'm just human, guys. You know, it's like, I'm,
exactly.
You know, I'm just one of you, but I'm also better than you, sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. What's going on up here is far superior, but how I interact, I'm just normal. You know.
Yeah, I'm not trying to cancel him. Don't come after me. You know, it's almost like a.
But let me tell you why you should be cancelled.
It's almost like a preemptive, like, defense to the responses, like on Twitter. You know what I mean?
It does feel that way. It's almost like a cover up. So it's because, like, I suppose, like, these people, like, cancel culture is so infamous and so notoriously toxic and abrasive that it's almost like the people that are the cancel culturists are like evolving, you know, and like covering their arse a little bit.
That's what I'm talking about, man. They're no longer going after deplatforming. They're now like, oh, we don't think he shouldn't exist, but the way he exists is definitely wrong. You know, it's like they're basically saying the same thing. You know, they want him to become the streamer that they want, which is not the streamer that he is. So he's basically being cancelled. You know, it's evolving into this like new engine now where they're learning from the mistakes, Lewis. They're growing.
Yeah, they are. That's the concerning thing. It's because, like, well, I don't know, is it actually concerning though? Because, like, when it sounds like most people that read this tweet from that person that was going against DisguisedToast, like, they recognised it quickly for what it was, right? Like, you said that you read this, and you said that when you were reading this week, it kind of got you thinking about cancel culture again. Do you think, like, given the comments of when you saw this comment, people were aware that this was someone targeting him for an attack, or was it like, this person's just trying to help out?
There was like a few backwards and forwards. There was the thread originally, then there was Toast's response, then there were people defending Toast, being like, you're not being cancelled. Then there were a wave of defendants saying we're not trying to cancel him, but there were also a bunch of accounts that actually were trying to get him cancelled. So there was like a sort of like disruption within the ranks of the people who were, as they were trying to do it. There were some people that were saying cancel, and others were saying educate, and streamers came to his defense saying we can't cancel him. And you know, it was a really strange war. And like we spoke about before, I think it takes a really strong a person that has really strong opinions on this thing to kind of come backwards and forwards. So we're really, on Twitter, we're really only seeing the people that feel very strongly about it. You know, we're seeing the people who want to educate him strongly, or want to cancel him strongly, or the people that are defending him strongly, and that's the only three we really see. You know, we don't really see anybody else.
That to me, that kind of puts in perspective how vulnerable certain people must be to this type of cancel culture. Then it's because, like you said, like, only the people that feel really strongly about this are doing it in the first place. So only, like, and Toast has like millions upon millions of fans, so luckily he really does have that like you know, mountain of people behind him to kind of back him up. But there must be so many scenarios of lesser known people that just like get totally and utterly stampeded by these people, and it might be through people like giving them full education, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, if they don't have this type of like people defending themselves, because it's not like this is a conversation. This is literally just like two people, well, not two sides. Obviously, in this case, there was a large number of sides, but this is just like a bunch of people shouting, and hopefully whoever's the loudest or maybe the most reasonable comes out on top at the end of the day. If you're targeting someone that's relatively unknown, you'll never hear from them again.
Yeah, I think that is one of the reasons why there was such backlash, because Toast is in lockdown through this Among Us content. He's seen massive growth. I think he's gone from like less than 1 million subs on YouTube to like 3.5 million in like a very short space of time.
So he went from like huge to absolutely ridiculously huge.
Yeah, he went from like big to massive in about 6 or 7 months or something like that, which is a massive influx in subscribers. So there are people that are like really enjoying his content right now, and there are probably so many of them that just don't find him offensive whatsoever. So that kind of leads on nicely to the next question. Toast's content is quite edgy, like we've said. It's quite dark. He rides the line between offensive and funny. He rides it quite well, in my opinion. Do you need to watch what you're saying online or in person in case it offends someone? Because in this example, one person's offence might be another person's funny joke.
Yeah,
so
I know.
To what extent can you tell someone what is offensive and not allowed and what's not? Like, do you need to start watching what you're saying?
In my gut, what I want to say is that you can say whatever the fuck you want, but we've already discussed in the podcast a couple times that it's just not realistic to be like that, and I strongly advise people to develop strong views that they have an understanding about, but you need to be prepared to back that up, and you cannot be inflammatory. Like if you are saying something with the intention of pissing someone off, then like you're going to get trouble online, and that's going to be really bad for you. So I think, especially being like a large personality like Toast, you unfortunately you have to watch what you say. There's too many fans out there. I think it's a shame. It's because I feel that by having to like watch what you say, you're becoming less genuine. I think you'll have to be less genuine, but how could you not watch what you say?
I don't think I could disagree with you more, actually. I think that anything that you say online is like fine. And Toast obviously says this stuff, and he's obviously had backlash before, because in the response he says he mentions that it's like edgy and stuff like that. So he's obviously had people before, and he says that he would normally just say, "Don't watch my content." So that's like, he's obviously experienced this before.
I think everyone at his size would have.
Yeah, and I get the person that's made this thread. They've made this thread because they think he is being offensive and he is causing harm by doing this. I understand that, but it seems to be coming from this like evangelical perspective of like, I know what's right and you just don't know you're being wrong. Now, I don't think it's possible to speak freely without risking offending someone. There are certain topics, and I think comedy is like one of them, where you can't begin to watch what you say in case you offend anyone, because then you won't be saying anything. Pretty soon you'll be saying absolutely nothing, because somebody will be able to find offence in like what you're saying. Like, so let's take politics for an example. Let's say that Boris Johnson comes out tomorrow and he says that he's taking money away from like funding homeless people, and he's now funding the NHS. Now, people will get offended by that because homeless people obviously need the help, they're in poverty, but there will be an element of backlash there. But let's say, for example, he then says, "Oh, okay, I'll take money off the NHS and I'll now give that to homeless people." Now you've got a bunch of like nurses and doctors and people that work in hospitals that are offended because they need that money, Or let's take a third option where he comes away and he says, "Okay, none of you guys are getting that money anymore. I'm now giving it to Group C." There are certain situations in life where no matter what you say, someone is going to be offended, and to watch what you're saying to try and offend no one, there are certain topics and subjects like comedy where all of a sudden you'll just be saying nothing.
I'm not at all trying to say do not risk offence of anyone. Like that's not at all what I'm trying to say. Like, because I 100% agree with you. Because that's what I was talking about Toast earlier on. I feel like by having to limit, like he said he wants to limit the type of humour he's going to do in the future. I feel like that's a shame. It's disingenuous. It's not his true character, and ultimately dulls the personality that was. But at the end of the day, like we live in a world with consequences, and as much as I think it would be a great world if I could go online and say whatever I wanted, and like it doesn't matter if people get offended, because that's fine. Because at the end of the day, they are who they are, and I'm who I am. But at the end of the day, like the people we work for monitor social media. If we were to go and say something truly offensive, if we were to go and like say the N word, I would have lost my job. Like there are serious consequences to what you say, and that's what I mean. Like you cannot just. You have to have some awareness of the language and the descriptors you use, because there are some things where like the consequences are so bad where you can affect your entire life. If you were to be cancelled, and I agree there are some situations in where you cannot avoid that. It's going to happen.
So
if you can avoid, it's like
in the instance of like saying the N word there, like that, if you were to say the N word on Twitter, your boss was to find out and you were to get fired, I would say that was a reasonable thing to happen. If your company doesn't want racists working at the company.
Okay, that's the extreme. What about see that the guy on the YouTuber who's done very well for himself, Something Funny? You mentioned him earlier on. He said he's got the #1 game Patreon.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's Colin Moriarty, the guy's name. From
Moriarty.
Yeah, from Kinda Funny.
If you made that joke, the joke that he made, would you expect your work to get angry with you?
I would probably expect a little bit of backlash, yeah, but I also think the joke's pretty fucking shit, so I wouldn't have made it in the first place.
Well, but that's the problem though. Everyone thinks their joke's funny until they tell it to someone.
So in the instance of DisguisedToast, when he's making these jokes, there are people that are finding them offensive, obviously. But there are also a bunch of people that are getting a lot of enjoyment out of his content. So how do you line up the balance between people that are being upset and people that are finding enjoyment in these things? Because there are obviously a small minority of people that are finding offence to what he's doing. Yeah. But there is a large majority of people that are saying these things aren't offensive. It's obvious he's making jokes and they're funny. So where do you draw the line there?
I don't think you do. I don't think there is balance there. That's not what we see when we go online. There's no history of balance. Like either someone is big enough or they have enough support that they're able, in scenarios, to drown out these people that are attacking them, or they are small enough and they are cancelled. Like there's right now we don't live in a place where there is any level of moderation there. And after having this conversation, it's like, how the hell do you moderate that, honestly? Because this topic is so human, it's so subjective, it's so I don't know, man.
So you gave the example earlier when you said that people should be watching what they're saying, and I would agree with that if you were a racist or if you were a sexist. So
right, no, I don't agree with that.
No, see when if someone is a racist, like you're saying, you gave the example earlier of someone who like says the N word online, that's got very clear consequences. Now, I don't think reasonable people like say that word. You know what I mean? Reasonable people don't think in racist tones. They don't think in sexist tones. And I would say that like Toast is like a reasonable person. Maybe every so often he says something that is grounded in some sort of offence, and he should be educated on that. We can all learn. We can all grow at the end of the day. But if you're not like a racist or a sexist person, why would you have to watch what you say at risking offending someone? You're not going to say racist or sexist things, surely.
I don't think that's necessarily true at all. Like, because we're saying like racist and sexist, sure, but I think cancel culture has proved to us that it doesn't take much for you to be cancelled. You don't need to be grossly offensive. You just need to offend the wrong group of people at the wrong time, which almost goes in as an argument against my proposition of watching what you say. It's because in some ways it does seem like whether you get cancelled or not is blind luck. It's because, like you said, like there will be a group of people that will find offence to it. So yeah, it almost
comes down to like convincing the masses at that point, right? Because if If you think there's like something offensive about, like, this person finds something offensive about something that Toast has said, it's about convincing everyone else that this is offensive, you know. And if people don't buy into it, you don't get cancelled. And if people do buy into it, you do.
It seems to be quite easy to get people in on that, and I can imagine how it is easy as well. It's like just for instance, given that like the twit long that you mentioned earlier on, like some of the claims of him being, you know, racist, bigoted, or whatever, like they're so insubstantial, and like we're sitting there reading it, but like see someone that's in a bad mood that day, or maybe they don't like Toast, maybe they have another streamer that's like preferable to them. That's all they need, you know. All you need is like a couple facts, you know, like a couple, he said this on this day at that time, see the video here. They don't need to see the video, they just need to know there's a video there. You know, I think it's probably very, very easy to convince people that someone's worth cancelling. I think the hard part is doing what DisguisedToast did and then coming out with the reply and explaining it, because like it is hard, just because you're going to have to admit that sure, this is a nuanced issue, you're going to have to describe the complexities of it and say that I maybe shouldn't have said that, and that's so much more difficult than just saying he must be silenced, you know.
Yeah, I think to have gone through that and to have come up with a response that isn't really an apology was probably quite brave of him to do that, but also correct in this instance. I think, you know, there's an element of like giving into them as well, giving into this like cancel culture mob, especially when you don't agree with them. You know, I think you probably do have to stand your ground in that situation. So I guess in essence, I sort of understand where you're coming from, in the sense that you have to like watch what you're saying. I just don't think that's the way things should be, you know. I kind of guess cancel culture engine is sort of like changing things for the worse sometimes. You know, that there are people out there that are being offensive, and maybe you should be educating people on what they're doing. But this case is like, you know, it seems to be so clearly insubstantial. It's almost like if you're getting offended about the things he's putting out, I'm kind of almost at the point where I'm like, you need to grow thicker skin. Like, you need to be like not offended by that. And if you are offended by it, just go watch something else. You know, they're just I don't think that not everything that someone finds offensive should be cancelled. You know, I think there comes a point where people have like different opinions, and you can't not say things that won't offend anyone, because very soon you won't be saying anything. And as a viewer of like a Twitch stream, it's kind of your responsibility to keep away from that stuff if you don't like it. But there are like circles of the internet in which it could exist. And if the stuff he was saying really was offensive, if he was a sexist, if he was a racist, I don't think he'd be getting the audiences, you know? He wouldn't be getting the clicks on these videos. If I was watching a video of DisguisedToast and I was coming away with the opinion that he was a racist, I wouldn't be watching his content, you know?
Right, yeah, and a lot less people would be, you know, like the only people watching it would be racist. And then
exactly.
And then you know what? Then we can cancel them, fucking free conscience. Don't worry about it. See if there's like many thousands upon thousands of people that don't think what you think, then you know, just
you know, and
it's all.
I'm not saying that people can't be offended by his content, you know, because you have the right to be you have the right to be offended by whatever you want, but that doesn't that doesn't trump his right to like say it at the same time, you know, to make these jokes, because at the end of the day they are just jokes. It's not things that he thinks, and he's not. I don't think these jokes are like convincing anyone to be a sexist or a racist or anything like that. You know, they're not dangerous.
Yeah, it does seem that we're in the current stage in society where we're starting to put much more value in the perceived comfort of the oppressed few over the regular life of the majority. You know, it's like these we have like people, and we just want to swaddle them up and remove them from the reality of the world. And the problem with these people as well is that when you do give them an inch, they will take a yard. You know, if you admit that was wrong, it's like expecting a couple months to find a bunch more things with other people that were also wrong. It's quite vicious.
It comes across as quite entitled to me, to be honest. To say like, you know, there are some people that find this offensive. Maybe you're one of them, maybe you're not. And then to tell someone how they should be acting to like tiptoe around that. It seems so like entitled to me to be doing that.
Oh, yeah. It's like these people think quite highly of themselves, you know. And I maybe that's where I was. Maybe that's where I was getting like virtue signaling vibes. You know, it's like this inherent superiority, which is just, it doesn't add. It just adds a further communication breakdown. It's because when people walk into this with like this faux education, but at the same time talking down their nose, you know, it's like what, you know, it's just such a we're never going to get anywhere here. And unfortunately, the one thing I think I've drawn away from this conversation is that this is like bafflingly complex, and we will not expect simple AIs made by Facebook or Google to get anywhere close to dealing with this issue in the next 10 years. You know, like this requires like social engineering on probably a deeper level.
One good thing that I've seen come out of this whole, you know, debacle is though that it seems like that he hasn't like broken. You know, they've tried to like almost break him down, and the response to the tweet is like quite strong. He's like backing himself up, and he seems to have a lot of like support as well. Now, in this case, I don't think there's any reason why he should be cancelled or why he should change. So, and I think you're right. The people that try and cancel them, they come across as so entitled that once they've cancelled like one thing, they'll just find something else to do. You know, they'll find something else to cancel. So
to make the world a better place.
If you start like giving into them, they won't ever stop. And before you know it, Bernie Sanders is being cancelled because he's too socialist or whatever. And it's like eventually somebody's like not enough for them. You know, you're not equal enough. You're not this. You're not that. It seems like it'll just go on forever. And it was kind of the same example with the Colin Moriarty from Kind of Funny, where it was like there were a bunch of people trying to get him cancelled, but there were also what seems like a vast majority of people that just weren't bothered by his tweet. They were like, oh yeah, this joke wasn't funny, and they just scrolled past it, didn't take offence. And then it almost seems like once he left Kind of Funny and made that stand not to be part of the company anymore, he became much more successful. So it's almost like the masses are like fighting back against it now. You know, it's kind of coming to the side now where cancel culture has kind of risen up, but now it's gone too far, and like the regular person is like, I don't care about this. Like, I don't care about this joke that he's put out. It's not funny. I don't think anyone's offended by this. When it comes to toast, it's like these jokes actually do happen to be funny. I don't think anyone's really offended by these things. I don't think they're offensive. So they're still watching his content. You know, that they're not. It seems like people are kind of fighting back, and what you're seeing on Twitter is like the people that are just having their voice on Twitter. You're not seeing the majority of thoughts on the matter. You know, so it's kind of positive, I think.
Yeah. I guess you could. I don't know if I necessarily am perceiving the fact that people are waking up to this, to be honest with you. I'm only ever seeing when cancel culture fails, it's when it's against someone that's very well liked by a community. I think I don't know how much evidence there is that I've suggested thus far that it's getting better, because like I know this is like right at the end, but like wouldn't one of the main actresses of Star Wars Mandalorian recently get fired from Disney? She's never going to work for Disney again because she said that the divide in America was I think she basically said it was the same as the divide in Nazi Germany. And that was, I think, I'm obviously paraphrasing to some extent, but what she's saying there isn't necessarily wrong. You know, it's obviously, she could be conflating things, but at the end of the day, there's nothing inherently offensive there. But just by saying, you people, you know, but that tweet alone, Disney basically heard, you know, you people are Nazis, and then she's got cancelled for that. And she has like huge amounts of fan support. That was like a corporate decision that was made.
I did see this. I did see this news story. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember seeing that she'd said stuff that people were like venomously against.
That's what kind of doesn't give me much hope right now. You know,
I guess in the case of like cancel culture, if the company like perceives the fact that you're now going to be losing them money, like that's kind of like the line drawn. You know. And in the case,
would she have lost the money?
I don't know. I'm not entirely sure.
I don't know.
Maybe from the perception of it. I don't know. I remember reading about it, but I honestly can't remember. But in the case of DisguisedToast, I definitely don't think he's going to see like any impact because of this. His videos are still going to get as much watch time as they have. Like people people are I think the people on this one in particular are like reading into this and they're seeing that they just don't agree with what the person is putting forward. There are people on Twitter that are agreeing with it and they're trying to back them up, but like I think the vast majority of people are just sort of like brushing it aside and being like, I don't agree with this, I don't think what you're saying is correct, and you're sort of coming at it from the point of you are correct, when it's not a black and white issue, you know, it's a nuanced thing.
Yeah. And a final note, it does seem that people that do go through the crucible of attempted cancellation do come out very strong. You know, like
the ones that succeed definitely benefit from it. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. It's because like there's almost like a barrier there. It's like, you know, you've tried it already, and I've dealt with it in a way that people found very positive. It's like PewDiePie's been through it, you know, hundreds of times, and now he
sometimes rightfully so as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, but like, he's basically invincible now, and yeah. So it's it's just a funny one. Somewhat depressing, but at the same time absolutely fascinating, and I guess there's some evidence to suggest it could be getting better.
Yeah, if your channel like makes it through the gauntlet, you're about to gain a lot of subscribers because you just got advertised like hell.
Yeah, well, we know that there is a way through it. There is a way of getting past cancel culture, and yeah, if you're able to crack that nut, then good for you. You've probably just earned a couple 100,000 subscribers from doing that alone.
Yeah, I think it's just about the general perception of the issue, isn't it? If people actually do agree with the cancel culture mob, they're like, well, actually, this is offensive, and if you don't deal with it in the correct way, then, you know, we don't really want to watch your content anymore. There's an element of that I kind of agree with, you know. Yeah. People voting with their views. But yeah, if you do make it through and people are like, no, it's not offensive, you've just opened up that channel to a whole new audience that they're now gonna start to see, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so an interesting one, I thought, and not exactly obvious on like what should be happening with the whole thing, but I'm kind of like, I'm happy with the response that Toast put out. As a fan of his, I'm happy with it. I hope his edgy humour doesn't change, because quite frankly, he's absolutely hilarious.
Okay. Yeah. No, that was good, and I'm really glad that we did reapproach this topic, because I think we went into a lot more depth than we tried to. We were like construing the death of the artists with cancel culture, and I think there are connections there, but that topic really warranted an episode for us both to talk through it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we never really spoke about like pushing your boundaries onto someone, which is kind of what cancel culture is, and you know, I don't really think it's anyone's necessarily their right to tell people what's offensive and what's not. You know, find what you want offensive, but if the vast majority of people don't find that offensive as well, don't expect things to get cancelled because of it. You know, don't expect people to agree with you.
Sure, and consume your media based on what your taste and offence is.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
If you know that dark, cynical humour is going to piss you off, don't watch Toast.
Yeah, and there is a place on the internet for people that want to try and educate, but don't come at it from this like high platform. Have a conversation. Like, don't tell someone why they're wrong. Tell them why you think differently. And you know that might be better. You know, that might raise awareness then, and the streamer might be like, actually, that could be right. You know, if Toast had seen this thread, it got a lot of likes, and he'd read it and he thought, you know, that could have changed his mind. But instead, it was almost like an attack. So he's kind of put up his shield, sort of thing, and he's more likely to disregard it. You know.
Well, I think that what you're describing is just so much more likely to start a conversation. Instead of saying that you think this and that's wrong because of this reason, you just say, I think this. What you've done has made me think this. That's almost an invitation for other people to then chirp in with their thoughts, and that's how like these constructive conversations start.
Although maybe that wouldn't have got as much traffic as the attack.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. There's a reason that we saw it phrased as we did see it, and the person is probably quite thankful for the boost in views they got that month.
Yeah, so that's what we've been kicking about this week.
Great.